Welcome to the Cycling in Alignment podcast, an examination of cycling as a practice and dialogue about the integration of sport and right relationship to your life.
Greetings and salutations, Space Monkeys. Before we begin our episode, a brief reminder that this podcast depends on support from the audience. The reason I am able to continue with this project is because of the support of patrons. If you are a member of my audience and you feel I have offered you insight or added value to your cycling journey, please consider a visit to my website, colbypierce.com, where you can make a contribution to the Cycling in Alignment podcast. You can support the show for as little as $8 for a one-time contribution, or choose to subscribe as an ongoing member. Thank you for your consideration. Here's your reminder to think critically, act intuitively, and pedal consciously. So, Dr. Scott Frey and Brent Bookwalter, welcome to Cycling Alignment. Thank you for making the time to come on board today and talk to me.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Fry, by the way, just to get that out of the way early.
Thank you.
I've sat through podcasts and never corrected people, but
Ray Fry. Yeah. So I grew up racing with Kent Bostic and John Fry. I believe he's also a Fry.
Yeah,
do you know those guys?
I know his name. I don't.
Yeah. Okay.
Brent might.
He actually,
do you know
held the U.S. hour record when I broke it, which I think maybe you can see my. There's my really dated photo there.
That position holds up, though, Colby. I think that position is still holds up. That
by today's standards,
you look slippery, man. Yeah.
I mean, the skin suit is what is like. That's where we've made insane gains. Like that thing is a crack bag in comparison. Yeah. But anyway, pretty funny. Look at it now and think about that stuff. So you're right on the nose. Slippery. That was my moneymaker right there. It wasn't a big engine. It was making a tiny hole. So anyway, yeah.
Nice. Love it. Very cool.
Rock what you got, right?
Yep.
Exactly.
That's right.
Cool. Well, Brent and or Scott, I'll let you guys ping pong on who's gonna start off and tell us why we're here and what we want to talk about today.
Do you want to go, Brent, or would you like me to set it up?
Let the Dr. Frey professor go. You're good at this.
Okay. Well, to get us started, what I would say is we're here to talk a little bit about what traditionally sports science has completely neglected, or almost completely neglected. If you look at all the advancements in sports science, you'll find very little discussion about anything from the neck up. It's all about cardiovascular systems, metabolic systems, neuromuscular systems, and so on. And great strides have been made by taking that perspective. But of course, that's ridiculous when you think about it, because the brain is the central controller of all those systems, and it's a central controller of all of our behavior, including all of the behaviors related to training and performance. And so one of the things that Brent and I have been working on together is how can we put the brain into the equation where it belongs, really is the hub of all of sports science in a sense, at least from my perspective. And I think Brent would probably be on board with that. And that's a complicated thing. Obviously, that's sort of very view from 30,000 feet, big picture. But my background is in neuroscience. I trained as an experimental psychologist, and then in the early 90s, we got these amazing technologies that allowed us to actually look in living human beings' brains. Well, they did things like planned motor actions, imagined movements, perceived sensory stimuli, experienced emotions and memories, and all of these things that are part of all of our life, but also part of our performance life. And so I had the really good fortune to enter the brand new field of cognitive neuroscience at the very beginning, and to begin to try and understand better how the brain was creating our behavior in a very general sense. And I spent 30 plus years as a professor running a lab that used tools like functional magnetic resonance imaging and various sorts of brain stimulation and electrophysiology to try to make a progress on basic questions about how the brain controls performance. And so in 2023, when I decided to step away from that career, I did so with a mission. And that mission was the one that I described to you a moment ago, to try to figure out how can we take some of the amazing things that have been going on in brain science and really begin to apply them in the world of human performance. And so I had the good fortune also of meeting Brent. And I'm not sure exactly how that came about, Brent, but you may have a better recollection. But since then, we kind of, at least for, we both do things on our own, but we also do things together and kind of have a really nice friendship as well as a collaborative work together. And obviously, Brent brings a very different perspective to the work. And maybe you could say a little bit about that, Brent.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Scott. My perspective and path really comes as that of an athlete and a performer. And the realization during my career that this aspect of performance from the neck up was very much neglected. And it was a real pivotal turning point, revitalization, and even you could say like revolution of my career when I began to start devoting some time and energy to the more mental or psychological aspects of performance. That really was responsible for creating the career that I had. That said, it was difficult to find practitioners. It was difficult to find athlete level knowledge that I could uptake and learn from while I was also training. And my coaches weren't always equipped. The teams really weren't equipped. I was fortunate to be on some of the best teams in the world, BMC Racing Team and the team that's now Jayco Alula. But this idea of working on performance from the neck up was not really even involved in the conversation of performance. It was all about, it was all about our muscles and our watts and all the cool gear that we all love too. But yeah, so I, as I was transitioning out of the sport and professional sport and contemplating what the next phase was for me, I decided that this was it. This is what I'm passionate about. This is what I want to learn more about and connect back to. So I'm working through this applied sport and performance psychology master's degree, and a bit of knowledge there, but the whole time combining it with my lived performance experience. And a little bit of what Scott was just talking about there was also what I felt like was really missing in my career. My career happened during this time Scott was just talking about, where this field of cognitive neuroscience was developing. So as an athlete, especially a professional cyclist, we love the data, we love the numbers, we want the metrics, but it really wasn't available or ready yet. And from what I'm learning, through what Scott is teaching me, that field has really come a long way just in the past few years. And I think it's an exciting time to be able to intertwine these broader mental performance coaching, psychological coaching philosophies with actual concrete data of neuroscience and combine those two to really make gains and approach performance in a new way.
Yeah, you're floating around, I think, a really interesting line there. I talk a lot about this with my athletes and coaches that I work with. And that's there's a sort of superficial obsession, or I don't know if superficial is the right word. There's a surface obsession in the sport with numbers and data, right? Everybody wants to know the numbers. Everybody wants to know how many watts Tade is making, or how many watts, whatever Lynn Jackson's making in a given effort, or for an average normalized par for a race or whatever. And then we're talking about grams of carbs per hour, which is the ultimate snore conversation for me, to be honest, for a variety of reasons. But I think I was reading some of the text on your site, Scott, and you talk openly about how even with the data we have, with the information we have, all coaching on all levels it's a summation of art and science, right? We take data that informs decisions, and then we have to apply it in some way. We have to interpret numbers. Interpretation of data is so critical. It's so important. There's a million ways to read a paper and come out with different conclusions potentially, right? No matter how developed the abstract is, or how much the author talks about the conclusion, people can read a paper and come away with different things. So I think that line is really important. And as much data as we have that delves into this topic, which maybe to some of my audience, they're thinking like, oh, this is the first time I've heard of this or thought about this. Probably not. Most people are probably well aware that the mind obviously has a large role in dictating our performance, right? As you said, Scott, it's the central computer, right? But I think some people shy away maybe from the idea of this type of sports performance talk, right? And I've heard you mention this, Brent, on other pods as well. I can't recall which one at the moment, but there used to be maybe even a bit of a stigma around it, like, oh, you're in the realm of sports psychology, like you're broken, or there's something bad, or there's something with you that needs to be fixed so that you can get to the important stuff. The important stuff is the watts and the engine max or whatever. And I really like the idea that there's no separation, right? It's mind body. It's the athlete expresses the physical potential as a whole. And to get maybe a bit possibly drawing a area of study that I've worked with. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Paul Chek or the Chek Institute, but he has this model that he talks about, which is the totem pole. And the totem pole is a hierarchical map of the human body, and the top of this totem pole is the psyche. And so his model really indicates or would submit that the psyche dictates everything that happens below. And at the bottom, you have the pelvis, the legs, right? The femurs and the lower leg bones, and the ankles, the slave joints, as he calls them. And they're way at the bottom. There's all sorts of other steps in between, the vestibular system and et cetera, right? And the point being that after 40 years of working with injured athletes of all flavors, his conclusion was, when you really, really want to get to the root of many, many injuries, not all, but I think he would say most, the psyche is the driver. So parallel track of study, but I don't know what you guys think about all that.
No, it's super interesting. And, I gave a talk a few years ago to, like, it was the USAC and the Triathlon Federation had an endurance exchange. And I started that talk with a paper that was a meta-analysis of meta-analyses. And basically it was 8,000 individuals total in this study. And they were looking at pharmacological treatments, surgical treatments, and medical devices. And they collapsed across all of them. And they were looking at what's the magnitude of the placebo effect. So they had all these trials that had a placebo condition and a treatment condition, but they also had a neutral condition with no treatment. So they could estimate the magnitude of this placebo effect. And basically the takeaway point was that the placebo effect dwarfs the effect of the actual treatments. Yep. So the point in bringing that up here and bringing it up to that audience was to really stimulate a conversation around how much do you think of all the things that we're doing to try to optimize our performance with recovery boots, nutritional interventions, types of intervals sessions that we're doing, all of it. How much do you think of the benefits of that are due to what we believe about their effectiveness? And I would argue that, at least based on this kind of data that's been out there for years in my world and in the medical science world, that probably most of it is. And for us to kind of exclude everything from here up is very naive. And of course, good coaches don't do that, right? Good coaches, if you sit them down and you talk to them, they may want to talk about your watts and your FTP and all those things, but they also understand, as you said, that this is art meets science. And we can read papers and we can say, wow, it's evidence-based, right? Doing the 4x8 minute intervals is giving you a more significant bump than the 40-20s or whatever. Pick your thing. There's a million interval recipe studies, right? But what's that saying is, on that day, and I know you know this, and I know Brent knows this, but I think a lot of people don't appreciate this. They're like, well, that means that those are what I need to be doing. And that's actually not what it means. What it means is that for that group of individuals, in that particular day, in that particular application, this was statistically significantly better, right? Unlikely due to chance that it had a bigger impact. But that doesn't mean that that's the right path for you. And we can look at any treatment in medicine, for example, and what you see is that even treatments that prove ineffective, they worked for some of the people in the clinical trials and they didn't work for others, right? We're dealing with averages, and science is fantastic. I mean, I have close to 100 peer-reviewed papers cited, I don't know, around 10,000 times. And I'm a true believer in science, but what science needs to be understood correctly, and that is as a kind of beacon that can give us a clue on which direction to head when we're trying to find our way into the harbor. But it's not going to tell you where to dock the boat. And that's going to require more nuance, and that's going to require the discriminating expertise of a captain. Yeah. And that's, I think, something that we really need to take into more consideration. And there's a lot of misinterpretation of this by people who you think should know better.
Should know better. Yeah. Yeah. You just synopsized that so well. I mean, for me, that comes down to people wanting certitude or certainty in things. They just, I mean, you could make the art. It's funny in 2025. It's like, oh, the sky's falling because of these reasons. These 12 reasons, these 19 reasons, whatever, economy, war, blah 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 blah, and not to those things. They're real challenges, right? And we just came out of COVID, which nobody would have predicted. Well, maybe a few would anyway, without unturning that rock. But I saw an interesting post the other day from Dr. Jack Cruz, also a non-controversial figure, and he reminded us of someone's life trajectory who was born in around 1920 and the wars they endured, the famines they endured, right? All the hardship they had. And his point was, he kind of walked through the whole thing chronologically. His point was, okay, yes, we have challenges in 2025. Yes, we have real threats to the security of our nation and the security of people worldwide. And the list goes on and on. But this is not new to the human experience. The threats change and the vectors change perhaps. But I guess, sorry, I'm like wandering off in the weeds here, but the point I'm trying to make is historically and currently, we've had these types of social and global stressors, whether you're fortunate enough to be an elite level athlete or maybe a person living in a third world country. The same is really true. It's just we're insulated to some degree depending on our living circumstances. But all of us, when we are faced with the presence of fear, it's easy for us to grasp for that rock. We want certainty. And we're looking for solid ground to stand on, right? We want to know that we're safe. That's ultimately what it comes back to. And that was maybe a 100,000-mile trip around the cosmos to come back to central governor theory and how the nervous system is trying to keep us safe.
I knew you were going there.
I don't think I knew I was going there until I just pulled that out of my butt.
No, I like it. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to start, Brent?
Go for it, Scott. Yeah, I mean, central governor theory. That's a. I think we're very fortunate to have the neuroscientist in the room.
Okay.
To discuss. So no need to get my very crust surface level explanation and insight on it.
Well, here's what I'd say about this. So the central governor theory was a theory that was put forth by Tim Noakes, a very well-known South African exercise physiologist who often chooses topics that are really controversial and sort of like that's his identity, I think, but a brilliant guy and often gets to things early for that reason. He gravitates to the points where, there's controversy. They're often the most interesting spots in science. And so Noakes basically resurrected an idea that's quite old. It goes back to like at least the late 19th century, that our capacity to do physical work is not limited. It's ultimately limited by our physiology in terms of the muscles and periphery. It is limited by our central physiology, which is the brain. Mm-hmm. And Noakes came up with this very nice way of capturing this, right? This notion of a central governor. So a governor on an engine, the job of a governor on an engine is to keep the engine from revving too high, right? It cuts down the speed at some point. So like e-bikes have a governor, and it prevents them from going over X miles an hour, I guess, something like that.
Or everybody's scooter that they want to use for motor pacing. The U.S. they're governed to 20 miles an hour. Like, that's useless, man. You got to go 40 on that thing.
Yeah, and as kids, we were always with little gas engines, like mini bikes, trying to like take the governors off and figure out how to hot rod them and all that stuff. So super fun, right?
Yeah.
But the central governor is a concept. It's a construct. It's a model in science for thinking about this, and I think it does a nice job of organizing things. And Sam Marcora then came along and had a slightly different take that I actually see is not all that different, but the sort of difference, as far as I can tell, between his psychobiological theory and a central governor theory is that, there's a more of a focus on conscious decision making versus unconscious processes. And I'm pretty agnostic to that. I think both are going on all the time in everything we do. We're controlled by things that are happening under the surface. Like if you think of you as an iceberg, or the mind as an iceberg, there's what sits above the surface. That's the stuff we're consciously aware of. So like we're having thoughts and this conversation, and I'm listening to Colby and Brent and thinking about what I want to say. But beneath the surface, there's a much bigger part of that iceberg, and it's all the unconscious stuff that shapes how we behave and think and act. So those guys have different perspectives on how much of the conscious versus unconscious are shaping the behavior of that governor. And I think it's both. But I think it's a very interesting way to think about things. There's been a lot of research subsequently that is, demonstrating that people can do supramaximal efforts, for example. So you can put someone on an indoor cycling erg and for example, have them do a max time trial, and then you can allow them to recover and say, well, you're going to race an avatar that is you in your previous max, and we want you to do everything you can to match it or try and beat it. And then unbeknownst to them, if you jack the speed of that avatar up so it's going 2% faster, people can often go 2% above their maximal effort, right? That's very difficult to explain over the intervals of time that have passed, because people haven't had time to really gain fitness, at least through no known mechanism that we would point to in exercise physiology, and yet they can go better than they did. Why is that? And the reason would seem to be that the governor, right, got tricked. And there are a lot of demonstrations, other kinds of demonstrations of that, even in the natural world, when you look at data like how quickly people run the last mile of a marathon. If it's coming up to a critical barrier, critical time point, like the 3 hour mark or something, people are going presumably as hard as they can, but they can find a little bit more. But the people who are looking at a 3:01, not so much. So that's a very long-winded kind of answer to your question, but I think what I like about that theory is it got people talking and thinking about, there's a lot more going on than we're really considering when we take the traditional sports science approach to these things. And I'm not saying it's all about what's going on in the brain, but I am saying that the brain is an important part of what's going on and how we perform, and why we can have good days and why we can have bad days. And there are dials and levers that we can manipulate if we're thoughtful, and if we bring in some of this brain science that I think can actually have powerful effects on behavior.
Yeah. And you touched on another part there that I think is interesting. Now I can't find it in my notes, and I just lost it. Completely lost it. Brain dump.
That's okay. Brett and I have talked about this kind of stuff, and from his perspective. So Brent's coming more from more traditional sports psychology, but also depth of being an athlete out there having to figure out how to solve this puzzle in the real world.
And generally, my experience is that despite all the physical training and all the support and the coaching, we're under-equipped to figure out, like, well, then it's like, tell me, how do I do that? Like the director on the radio or the coach will say things like, I really need you to focus now, or like, now is when I really need you to be motivated. Like, this is the most important time trial of your life, or like, I need big motivation out of you, or like, be really concentrated. But and what we're going after is what you just described, Scott, with that, like, we're trying to get that super maximal effort, but there in many cases, the tools, the guide, the support, the equipment to like take the athlete there to show us how, like, it was a lot of it was leaving it to chance. It was just like throwing it up and hoping, like, I hope I'm on a good day. I hope I'm not. And it manifests in the post-race interviews that we hear redundant and replayed over and over and over. Is like, oh, like, I had good legs today, or, oh, I was really motivated today. But it's for how calculated and prescribed and specific all the other aspects of our performance are, that achieving that guide, the tools to get that super maximal effort to override or like level up that governor are traditionally very, very underserved.
Yeah, you're right. It's when you think about how much money everybody's being paid and how much time and effort goes into sport at that level, the fact that we don't really have that many tools that can access that or train that in athletes. It makes me think of I don't know what year it was. It was the year Stephen Roach won the Tour. 88? Does that sound right? And I can't remember who it was that went up the road. I don't remember who ended up second. All I remember is Stephen, he made this very calculated effort on the final climb of the last mountain stage, and he knew he could get the guy, but he could only go with like 3K to go or something. So he just waited. Yeah. He waited and waited and waited. Yeah. And then he just lit himself on fire for the last, whatever it was, 3K or something, and won by some super small margin. And that's exactly what comes to mind, right? Is that level of performance, where we suddenly feel we authorize ourselves to open the gates and go for it. Right. And what is it about that construct that we created? Like, what are these barriers that we draw in our minds, these lines, these artificial lines that we draw? Like, I can't go there, but as soon as I cross this duration or this point in time or this kilometers to go, or this person passes me, then it's okay to go, right? Then it's okay to light myself on fire. Which brings to mind the concept of, you were talking about the 2%, the digital avatar that can push you, right? It's the same thing with our local nemesis, right? Whoever, that guy that pisses you off on the group ride, it's like, oh, he'll never beat me. And, you're getting shelled on the climb until he's in front of you or she's in front of you. And it's like, whoa. Now I'm authorized to go. Yep. So it makes me think of all these little games that we play in our minds as far as cadence or gearing or wind or conditions, the stories we tell ourselves about heat or cold and all those stressors that go in. And then at a certain point, it's okay for us to play. So, Scott, maybe you can talk about some of the tools you've developed that can help athletes have more conscious control over where we place those lines, or maybe just abolish the lines, really is ultimately the goal.
Yeah, that'd be great. So to set this up, I will say this. I think a helpful way to think about this is that we have a physical capacity, and that's not limitless, right? But at any one time, we're able to realize only a potential of that. And the ceiling on that, I would say, is your functional capacity. Is that okay, that language? And so that functional capacity is fluid and dynamic. And we were talking a little bit a moment ago about, that can move around, right? Your nemesis goes up the road, and it's like, I'll be damned if I'm going to let him beat me to the top of the climb this week. And you can pull it out and you can move that functional ceiling up a little bit. And in this case, it's a very conscious thing. You've made a decision and you're motivated by this, right? And a lot of it comes down to motivation. And motivation is affected by a lot of different things. And one of the things that affects it at a level that I think we're maybe not so consciously aware of, but actually has a huge impact, is something called central fatigue. So central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, they get tired, particularly the brain. And we know this intuitively, right? You spend a hard day at the office doing your thing, and then you've got to go train afterwards. And sometimes it's really rough to make things happen when you've not done any physical work, but you've been sitting on your ass in your office on your computer all day, dealing with a lot of stressful situations. You're tired, right? Why are you tired? Why are you tired? Physically, all you've done is sit there all day. You should be rested, right? But no, because you're tired centrally. And we've known, again, this gets back to the 19th century. We've known at least since the 19th century that central fatigue, that brain fatigue that accumulates over the course of the day, limits our capacity to do physical work. So it lowers that functional ceiling. Brilliant studies by this Italian physiologist named Angelo Mosso in the 1880s. And he basically built this little contraption where you could lift a weight, and he could look at how many reps could you do with your index finger until you just hit the ceiling and couldn't go anymore. And he showed that when people were physically fatigued, their ability to do physical work went down. And that got kind of lost for a long time. And then it got resurrected by a number of people within the last 20 years. One of them being, I mentioned, Samuel Marcora. And this has kind of become a niche topic, and people got really interested in understanding the mechanisms of central fatigue in the brain. There's now over 70 studies out there that have looked at the impact of central fatigue on physical performance, the ability to do physical work, and they're pretty consistent. So it's real. And I think most athletes are terrible at managing. So we are really good about, and Brent, it'd be great to hear your perspective on this, but very few athletes would go into like an Olympic final without tapering. Right? That would seem a little ludicrous because we know from the data that tapering on average gets you probably somewhere around a 2 to 3% bump. Of course, there are people who get more, people who get less from it. It's another one of those art meets science things like everything else.
Yeah.
But this central fatigue is at least that costly, and very few athletes I know, and this is one of the things that we work on with our athletes, is a mental taper. Most athletes, when they taper their physical training, they backfill in a whole bunch of other stuff, right? And it may be work stuff, it may be family stuff. And mainly working with professional athletes, they do it too. They find things to put in there. They spend a lot of time on video games, or they spend more time in social media. There are studies showing that both of those things generate central fatigue that costs performance. And so it's not rocket science, but what the data says is if we can reduce that central fatigue, that's going to pay dividends for the big day that's coming up. So that's one of the things that if we can reduce the central fatigue, that functional ceiling can go up a little closer to your physical potential. Is that, Brent, like in your experience, what do you think about central fatigue?
Yeah, that resonates loudly. I think I probably feel it more now as a weekend warrior and a dad, and someone who's like trying to study and learn at 41 years old. But absolutely, the cognitive load, this fatigue that builds from the central nervous system, like it's on display every day when I go out and try to push myself to any capacity. But this is like sort of it's this low hanging fruit that is low investment to sort of get, but it's still an area that's overlooked, and it's a real like practical connection to this science which you're discussing, Scott, and you've done really well to summarize. That is very, very accessible. This improvement to lower the central fatigue is something that really everyone can do at almost no cost, but is overlooked. And it's not as flashy as like the new wheels or the fancy shoes or the fast tires or the slippery skin suit.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard to make money on telling people, to do
To be
less,
on the phone less.
but it's also a hard thing to do. And it's not simple, and it requires a high degree of accountability. And not all of us are good at doing that for ourselves. Most of us aren't, in fact. But there's a flip side to this, Colby. And the flip side is, what if we could improve an athlete's capacity to handle central fatigue? Because even if you do the things to rest, central fatigue is coming for you. And it's coming for you in hour 4 of your race, right? When you've been fully attentive and physically on the rivet for hours. And that's when you need to be most attentive, most focused, making the best decisions, because that's usually when the big moves are going up the road. And if you could get an athlete to a point where they could be mentally fresher at that time, that could pay really big dividends for performance. And I think we figured out some ways to do that.
Yeah. That's the same. That's going back to this like philosophical of like fix what's broken psychologically, put Band-Aids on it, rebuild it when you're broken, versus this build it, strengths based, make you better. We're trying to, like Scott, you described that nicely, about having this absolute ceiling and wanting to get as close to that absolute potential as we possibly can, and to not let that the chance of getting there happen by accident, but actually building a system that allows us to get closer to our absolute potential more consistently. Because that is the beauty of competition, is like we're gonna go like whatever our limit is on that day, whatever our potential, whatever our threshold is on that day, we're gonna like take it up right to there. But so it's not just about, it's about building that and getting higher and raising the ceiling, as opposed to just limiting the damage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so we're talking on one hand about coaching athletes or educating them to reduce cognitive load, maybe globally all the time, like being aware of it, right? Sometimes just being aware of something can be curative in a sense. As soon as you witness it, right? It's like that's why diet tracking can work. It's like, oh, I didn't realize I was eating that many cookies. And so there's that. And then so educating the clients, but then in particular also coaching clients or having clients have the awareness to reduce their load going into peak races. You trained all year for Unbound or Leadville or Nationals or whatever you're going for, or maybe it's UCI Gravel World or something, and you're getting ready, and it's like that week, man, that's not the week to take on extra cognitive load. Like, honey, can we have your mom come visit the week after the race? That would be great. That'd be great. I'm just going to sit on the couch and read this book, maybe this chill book. But I do think this is like the dirty little secret of coaching, right? Is there are 2 dirty secrets of coaching. One is you almost never get a day off, especially as you accumulate clients in different time zones worldwide. The asteroids just come from all sides. So it's a great problem. It's kind of like, I equate it to being like a doctor on call, kind of, except maybe different. But the other dirty little secret about coaching is it's really about psychology. And no one in cycling coaching is qualified to be a psychologist. And yet, here we are doing the best we can to help people with their psyche. So how that ties into what we were just saying is the deeper unconscious programming, I'll say, or program running, the background programming, part of that iceberg that's underwater is, okay, you're telling your athlete, I need you to chill out the 3 days before your peak race that you've just trained for the last 9 months. And they're like, okay. Fingers drumming, foot tapping on the floor, like, what do I do? Can I wax my chain again? They're losing it because maybe some of that's momentum and habit of just go, 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 go. So there's that effect. There's like the 48 hours into vacation, your vacation really starts effect. But more insidious is the background program of like, somewhere I think a lot of athletes honestly have been programmed to believe that unless they're smashing stuff at 99.9% all the time, the real bottom line is they won't be loved. They won't be safe. They won't be, recognized as good people. So there's that. That's the psychology of coaching. And when you witness that in your athletes, it's like, ooh, the deeper conversation. So maybe not quite where you wanted to go with things. We're talking about the other side, which is building up so we talked about reducing central fatigue. What is it? What are we calling it? Are we training central fatigue resistance? Is that your terminology?
I think that's a nice way. Yeah, I think it's a nice way to put it. There's a really nice study out there from just a couple of years ago that looked at elite U23 cyclists, and it looked at the effects of inducing central fatigue on their performance. It was one of those 70 studies I was mentioning before that have shown that you can manipulate this and cause people's performance to deteriorate. And what it found was nice. So compared to some recreational cyclists, so it's comparing guys like you and Brent, super elite cyclists, to guys like me who go out and race, bang elbows on the local gravel ride or whatever. And what it found was interesting. The elite under 23 athletes were, and I guess this shouldn't be too surprising, they were more resilient to the manipulations of cognitive fatigue or brain fatigue or central fatigue than were the recreational people. And they also showed less susceptibility to cognitive deterioration in things like speed of decision making and impulse suppression and so forth like that. When after they had been kind of pushed hard on the bike. It shouldn't surprise us, I guess, that guys like you and Brent are special physiologically, but also your brain physiology is special, right? It's a part of why you got to the level you did, in addition to all of your hard work and so forth. And so this raises a very interesting question to me. And of course, it's a chicken and egg question, right? Were you born that way, or is it because you really worked and developed that, right?
Yep.
And we'll never sort that out, like so many chicken and egg problems. But what's interesting to me is, can we train central fatigue resistance? You hear a lot of talk now about durability. Well, can we bring that over onto the brain side of things? And I think we can. There are a good number of studies now, and I've watched this research develop over the last 15 or so years with a high degree of skepticism. So, I ran a successful lab. We invented tasks to probe the functioning of different brain systems and behaviors and all these different things. And, when you have an expertise, as you guys do, you see things through a different lens than people who don't have that expertise. And so I watched this science and I read the papers and I thought, yeah, that'll never hold up. But then the papers kept coming and they kept coming and they kept pointing in the same direction, that if we strategically combine cognitive load, challenging these cognitive systems like attention and situational awareness, rapid decision making, impulse response inhibition, which is a big part of like checking yourself and not going when you shouldn't go, right? All of these things that are, I would say, performance critical sorts of cognitive functions. If we train those when people are physically fatigued, we can get these synergistic effects that not only improve their cognitive function when they're tired, but actually have a bump in their physical capacity to do work because they're being less affected by the cognitive fatigue. And there's a bunch of these studies now, and they're consistent enough that I started playing with this stuff and developing programs with cognitive tasks that might have my athletes working on when they come back from hard training sessions. They do them soon afterward. They spend anywhere from 20 minutes to 30 minutes 3 times a week working on these. And essentially what we're trying to drive is something called neuroplasticity. So probably the biggest discovery in my field in the last 50 years has been the discovery that even the mature adult brain is constantly being reconfigured and shaped by our experiences. It's a very dynamic and very trainable. So we can train neural systems just like we train muscles, but we need to do it systematically, just like we train our muscles systematically going to the gym. We have to make these tasks progressive. We have to make them focused on the systems that we want to focus them on. They need to be, to some extent, individualized. They need to be periodized. And so I've been building those plans. And, Now the art part is, being able to read an athlete's data, because I'm getting quantitative data back from them, and make decisions about, is it time to give them more or less? All concepts that, of course, you coaches are really, really experienced and familiar with. And the results are really compelling and pretty consistent with what we would expect from the research for the athletes who bought into it and really committed to it. And it doesn't happen fast, right? But it does happen. And that's pretty exciting to me, because I think what we're doing is really at the very beginning of being able to, taking research from the lab, applying it in the real world, which is why I left my profession, because I wanted to see if we could do this stuff, and seeing real results in performance. And it's part of what we do, right? Got to do all the other stuff too. It's not a Band-Aid. It's not like, here, just go do these tasks and everything will be fine, because all the other stuff has to be working in life for everything else to go. And that's where the being a psychologist comes in, right?
My riders still have to do 5-minute intervals. They can't just do this brain training and sit on a couch.
Yeah, no, we're working on a pill for that.
Pretty sure someone already came up with a pill for that. But anyway, sorry, that got dark. Yeah. So cool. So maybe you can tell us a bit about your app, and then I can blabber about how my experience was, because I would love to hear your feedback on it. If you're willing to help me pick apart what I did, because I did your anticipation Stroop test. I went through the audio reaction test, and I have my own experiences with them. And of course, that means you can do this with my brain and tell me what works and what doesn't, right?
Oh yeah, we're going to turn your knobs, Colby.
Perfect.
But Scott, before you go into the technicalities there, I just wanted to again provide the connection to the real world, the practical, being out there in the field. This manifests and shows when we watch the spring classics, which we all love to watch. And you talk to these guys. I was never really part of this group when I was racing. I was teammates with these guys though. And these guys, most of them take a little mini off season after the classics, because they are physically, smoked, mentally, centrally, cognitively, they are smoked. And I've done enough of these races to know that this is a different central load, a different cognitive load, that relentless battle foot position, the minutia that you're playing with, the tension in the bunch. That is a real life training of how we're talking about training the brain. So these classic specialists, they grow up in Belgium. They do this from the moment they're 12. They're training and loading themselves in that way. So this is happening somewhat automatically in the background of training, of racing. But the idea is that we can't, it's not realistic for everyone to go and improve their ability to do reaction time, to improve their ability to resist distractions, that we can't access those environments. And it's not sustainable to do so either. It's in terms of training the psychology and the physiology, it's great to do some team training camp training, even with climbing, where you're racing with your teammates, you're having to react, you're having to make decisions, you're already fatigued and you're loaded. You just can't do that every day.
Yep.
But what's so exciting now is the science and the interface, the technology, it's finally coming up to where we can continue to build these systems without actually bashing bars for 5 hours consecutively in the spring classics, or having that big pressure training session at training camp up the last climb on the last day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a lot like, you can get really pretty good at riding your bike just by going out and riding your bike, and in an informal way, and, working some hills and sprinting for town lines and things like that. But if you want to take it to another level, you're probably going to be better off getting some structure in there and doing some structured workouts and having a plan. And I think of this as the same thing. Like Brent's saying, you're getting this stuff all the time if you're racing bikes, but I think we can do better through structured training. And one of the important things, Colby, and you may or may not have gotten to this part of the task, but I had you just a light would come on your iPhone, and you just had to react to it as quickly as you could, a bunch of times. Dead boring, simple reaction time tasks. But what that's doing is looking at how long does it take to pass a signal from the eye through the visual areas of the brain to the motor areas, down the spinal cord to your hand. And that time, it turns out, is sensitive to central fatigue. So that task my athletes do every time. And it's a way of me tracking their level of central fatigue. In addition to asking them, I don't think this replaces just asking the athlete, like, how do you feel? Are you tired? They do a little rating. You may or may not have had that pop up. But then in addition to that, we're not inventing any new tasks here, really. We're borrowing tasks from my world that have been used, in the research world to put stress on different brain systems: attention, short-term memory, response inhibition, rapid decision making, situational awareness, all of these things. And the magic comes in how to properly dose these, how to properly progress the difficulty of these over time. And so that is where the customization comes in, and looking at their levels of central fatigue and trying to really, this is the art meets science thing again. And so thank you for taking time to just look at what those are like. And I try to combine them. We try to combine them so that we're training these brain systems when they're already fatigued from training. We're laying this on.
Yeah. Well, for what it's worth, in my own little 53-year-old master's universe, I'm getting ready for a gravel camp I'm hosting here in Boulder next week. So I was pretty tired this weekend on Sunday. I rode, for me, above baseline like a good bit. It's like, cram for the exam here. I got to make sure I don't suck for this camp a little bit. So I was pretty tired. And then yesterday, my Mondays are always nuclear. I write training for all my athletes, but then on top of that, we're planning for the gravel camp. So yesterday was just like full gas all day. And then I was like, all right, I got to look at Scott's app. We're going to check this out. So I went and sat down and did it. And I think you have access to the data in the app, probably, from what I understand, because I think I logged in with your stuff. But so thank you for that. But the audio reaction test, I felt like I smashed that one. I even got to the point where I was like cutting off the beep sometimes because I was so fast.
Nice.
The Stroop, the color one, like the blue, yellow, red. So just to explain to people. So let me give context. So the audio reaction test is just what it sounds like. Like you hear a tone and then you touch the screen the second you hear the tone, or as fast as you can when you register the tone. So it'd be the same thing you described with the visual, only it's auditory, right? And for whatever reason, that one was like, oh, I love this. This is good. And then the Stroop test that I found in the app, digging around, was one that it would show you a word, and the word was a color, but the word also had color. So the word might be red, but it might be colored blue. And then you had to touch one of the, whatever they were, dots, I guess, with the corresponding color of what the text said, not the color of the text. Do I have that correct, or did I get that backwards?
So it's like the classic response inhibition task, because you automatically activate, your brain automatically activates the word and the color. And when they're consistent, if it's blue printed in blue, boom, you're great. But if it's blue printed in red, and then you have to suppress one of those things and do the other. And so that response inhibition is quite important to most athletic performances, right? And so, you've got it right. And I apologize. I didn't have time to go through your data. I will go through your data, though, and send you a note about it.
I'm the one who did it super late. So last minute.
I look at that data. I get this data back. Let's say I have somewhere around 50 of those tasks that I can use, and I can graduate them in their difficulty progressively. So if you were to work with me next week, you'd get a new plan, and those tasks, you'd see them again, and you'd be like, oh, I remember these, but now they're harder, right? We push you a little bit more. And then I kind of borrowed this from you guys, from the coaching world. It's like we progress for 3 weeks, then we back it down. And then we move on to different tasks that tap other systems.
Right. That's assuming that I was not terrible at them. I think I sucked at the anticipation test. I was terrible at it. So sorry to cut you off there, but
it's good.
So the audience,
and you bring up something important. Yeah, you bring up something important, and that's like, if we were, if you were a new athlete coming in to work on that stuff, and no one comes to me just for this, they come to me for all the rest of it. And then if it's a good fit, I'll say, or they don't come to Brent either, right? For this, it's like this is one tool in a toolbox, and it's not the right tool for every occasion, right? But you would do like a baseline assessment. We'd look like, oh, like Colby's really good at the audio reaction time processing, but maybe he's not as good at the anticipation stuff. So that gives us an idea where your strengths are, where we can develop those. But it's just like you look at a rider and you get their 1 minute power, their 5 minute power, their 20-minute power. It's like, oh, they have a profile. There's a phenotype, and we can work from that. So
yeah, exactly. So you wouldn't give them too much initially. If they're disastrous in one area, you don't want to overload their system, I would assume, right? Or maybe, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe that's where you really wail on them and try to push that neurodevelopment. What's your philosophy on
art
that?
meets science?
Art
meets science.
Yeah.
Right?
I'll add too here that when doing this as a competitor with someone that is like familiar with pursuing excellence or optimizing ourselves or like have perfectionist tendencies, there is inevitably also this relationship of like this self-judgment or like this confidence or like, yeah, I got this, or like, oh, this is crushing me, or oh, I hate this. I keep just getting
100%
destroyed. I remember my first experience with the closest form I ever had experience of with this sort of brain training was when I was recovering from a concussion earlier in my career. And the team referred me over to a neuroscience sort of professional who was working on facilitating like post TBI recovery with some training like this. But it was with no really feedback, no involvement, no coaching, no communication. And it was detrimental. I mean, maybe from a pure neural pathway level, like I was getting benefit, but it drove me absolutely insane that like I just felt like I was terrible at this. It was like added to the list of things that I'm terrible at recovering from a concussion. So like, yeah, I can't like overstate the importance of like the actual, once again, the artful combination of art, of science, the human connection. Like Scott he is not the mad scientist who's only in the lab and incapable of talking with people and navigating these dynamics that come up. Like I love that you said it, Colby. You're like, yes, it's like, that's such a classic, like ambitious performer thing to do. Like this, wasn't good at
Crushed
this,
it.
but like, but that's all wrapped up in here. And we're not trying to create another problem and create more complexity and create insecurities and doubt. But just like our physical training on the bike, it challenges us. It does like make us question ourselves. And sometimes you, as a coach, you tell athletes like, actually, man, like that was really good. It may have felt like total garbage, but like you're on the way, you're on the path.
You're on the right path.
Yeah. And sometimes we want to put our finger right on that insecurity, right? So I might I might add something layered into that task where you're getting feedback every time you make a mistake. That drives perfectionistic people pretty crazy, but sometimes we need to do that, right? We need them to get over that and adapt to that. And, the concussion thing's super interesting. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is, could we prehab people? Because if you're racing bikes, there's a big chance that you're going to experience a concussion in any given season, at least a mild one. And I think we underdiagnose these like crazy, right? You don't need to hit your head to get a concussion, but if you hit the ground hard enough, you'll get your brain will slam against the inside of your skull, and you'll probably get up and ride your bike away. But that's a whole other topic. But what if we could build these systems up? Would they be more robust to those sorts of changes? On the flip side, could we use these kinds of things to get people back sooner? We used to think that the best thing to do was tell people to really rest their brain after a concussion. And the thinking on that is really changing. So
that I didn't know. That's interesting. Will you talk a little bit more about that? I thought concussion protocols were still like lock yourself in a dark room and put your phone down. I mean,
I think that it's really starting to move away from that. And of course, look, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a PhD, so this is not medical advice. But I think that I think there's solid reasons to believe that that's probably not best for most concussions. There will be situations, I think, where concussions are severe, or even in the high moderate range where that's probably not great. But I think that introducing in a carefully monitored way, and that's the thing about the tasks I use, are very quantitative. We get data from them, right? We look at speed of performance, we look at accuracy, we look at variability of performance, and we can tell a lot about what's going on with somebody. So I think there's potential there to start to introduce some stimulation to these systems to help nurture them back to health.
And have you looked at overlaying some of those data points with HRV as like a cross 3D graph, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, pretty informally. So one of the things we can do is we can have you put on your heart rate monitor and we can acquire them simultaneously. And we know that if we put people, we've known this for a long time, and you don't have to be an athlete, but if we look at HRV when you're doing cognitively demanding tasks, it changes. It's one of the many things that affect HRV. And so central fatigue actually affects HRV. So mental fatigue can completely change your HRV, even if you're not doing any physical work. You're not trained. So we have a lot to learn about that. And we can gate your tasks based on heart rate. We can make the tasks only available to you when you're in a certain heart rate zone. Obviously, that only works when you're on the indoor trainer, but it's a way of concurrently kind of playing these games. But we can gate it on HRV too. So I think we have a lot to learn there. I think that's kind of out on the fringe, but I've been experimenting with that with myself mainly. I haven't rolled it out to the athletes yet.
Okay. Yeah, cool. What this makes me think about is, and I wrote some of this in my notes, but it makes me think about the difference between a simple criterium and a points race, for example, right? Points race is a crit, but you've got multiple sprints and it's throughout that race. And depending on the rules and how they're run, often you would have double points for the last sprint, and you would have for each sprint, there might be 10 sprints during the race, depending again on the length of the race and the track, size of the track and stuff. But typical points race might have 8 or 10 sprints, and it will be 5 points for the winner and then 3, 2, 1. So now you're in a situation where you're doing math during the race because you're racing and you get second place in the first sprint and third place in the second sprint, and you win the third sprint. And then you get a break with the other guys, and and then you're thinking about the point deficit between you and them, right? You're leading, but the guy's 3 points down on you. Then he wins the next sprint. Now he's 1 point down on you, right? But then you just both lap the field, and now you got 20 points for lapping the field. So the math component explodes, right? And then you add to it the dynamics of, on a short track, a 250, they ring the bell. So you're thinking backwards from the line where you want to be in the breakaway. You're in a 4-rider breakaway. They ring the bell. You want to be second wheel. You want to be leading. How does that inform your sprint tactics, your timing? So there's all these complex pieces that come to play. And when I watched for years, I raced track, obviously, as a pro. I did 6 days for a bunch of years and did all the things there. But I also coached a lot of runners on the track, and I would watch them come from the road, and they would get in a points race, and they just wouldn't even hear the bell ring. I watched roadies still riding hard after the final bell. When the race was over, they're still going hard. I'm like, dude, race is over. Didn't even, so.
That would be me, probably.
I mean, it's just a different environment as part of it, right? They're used to like one bell and then the sprint at the end of a crit, I suppose, and their minds. But it also makes me think about the occupation of the autonomic nervous system and how cycling becomes an autonomic activity. And that can even swell to the point where it occupies so much of your brain power that there's not that much room for conscious thought. So you don't have room to do things like calculate points. Or I've had interesting moments in races where I'm sure you've experienced this, Brent, where you talk to someone else in a race, and then after the race, you're like, dude, did you hear me say that to you? And they're like, oh yeah, I answered you. Not out of your mouth, you didn't. Maybe you did in your head, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, nothing happening, right? Or there's all those little moments that happen in racing. So people are just it's almost like they're in a trance state. Mm-hmm. So that really interests me, that idea of being entranced by cycling. This also explains why I think group rides in Boulder should be illegal, because there's so much traffic now. And we have this ancient group ride that won't die. And it goes on this highway north of town. And every time my riders do it, I'm like, stop. But, people get in that trance state and they think they're in a Peloton, and then they just drift out into the lane because they're just they're preoccupied with their position. They think all they see is the Peloton. They're missing the 5,000-pound car that's going into the other lane to pass them. And so
the great illusion that we all labor under is that we're aware of everything that's going on.
Right.
And that's ridiculous. We can bring you in the lab and show you, half a dozen different ways why that's obviously not true. Your capacity to process information in your conscious awareness is very finite. In fact, it's a much smaller bottleneck than most people appreciate. There's all this information coming in, just while you're sitting here in your office. I can hear something that's going on upstairs. My wife's got a meeting going on or something. There's a smell to the room when I pause to actually notice it. I didn't even notice that before. There's the taste of the espresso I was finishing off. There's the conversation we're having. There's all this stuff. And I can switch to all those different channels. But while I'm on one channel, there's a lot of other stuff going on that I have no awareness of. But we all live with this idea that we're aware of everything that's happening all the time, But so you put, 40, 50, 100 people on bikes moving 40 miles an hour down a road, all living in their illusion that they're aware of everything, and complex things can start to happen. And so, I think it's super interesting to be thinking about these things the way you're doing.
Yeah. I explain this to my clients a lot of times in my fit studio. When I ask them, I pop quiz them and I'll ask them, what do you think the primary purpose of the nervous system is? And I would say about half get it right, in my opinion, which I'll tell you my answer, then you can shoot that down in flames if you want. But I think fundamentally, the nervous system is really trying to regulate everything to keep us alive. The endogenous and exogenous signals, right? Right now, my nervous system, just as you mentioned, right, it's processing all this information. Like right now, I have pressure on my butt because I'm sitting on this rocking chair, right? But if it suddenly turned into 1,000-degree boiling pot of water, before even conscious thought happened. I mean, that's a ridiculous example, but a better example is if someone fired a gun in that parking lot right now, exogenous stimulus, before I even consciously understood what was happening, multiple things would happen to my body. My nervous system would fire my adrenals, my blood pressure would rise, right? I would probably assume a red light posture. I would duck, my pupils would dilate, my breath rate would increase, my heart rate would increase. I don't know, there's probably like 15 other things on that list at least. And before I even was like, whoa, someone just shot a gun in the parking lot. What the hell? So the nervous system is constantly assessing the environment for the wellness of the body internally, and threat, also looking for sources of water, food, chicks in bikinis, right? If you're a guy, like depending on the level of survival we're at, right? You got to, you only think about sex when survival is secure, hopefully. At least in theory, that's how it works, right? Got to be safe first before you're going to procreate, because you can't have a family in an environment that's not safe. That's the point I'm making. I don't know. What do you think about all that word salad?
Well, what I think is that's really interesting. And I think what sits on top of this is this great mysterious thing called consciousness. Mm-hmm. And, we could have the 3 a.m. dorm conversation about what even that thing is and why did that evolve and how did that evolve? But it's running this narrative all the time that's trying to make sense of all the things you just described as they enter our awareness and telling a story about them. And I guess what I would say is that story is extremely important. And that's why the kind of things Brent's doing and the kind of things he's talking about and the kind of things you're talking about with your podcast and with your athletes are so important, because that narrative actually changes our physiology. That narrative, that interpretation that's running all the time. You could sit here right now and the gun doesn't even have to go off, but you can start thinking about something that's really annoying to you that happened earlier in the day, and suddenly everything's changed. And we could look in your nervous system and see, that, wow, now the sympathetic branch of his autonomic nervous system is ramped up, and he's having digestive issues because he's stressing out. And you're just stressing out about a thought. You're not stressing out about anything that actually even happened. And that's something that that human beings have in abundance. And there's a lot to be gained by, I think, figuring out what can be managed there in terms of affecting performance, right?
Yeah.
As well as life, obviously, but to pull it back to.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the talking comes in, and that's where the value of really getting to know an athlete and understanding them in a way that at least AI now presently can't do. And that's I think what's special about these relationships that we have with coaches and things.
Yeah. I was just reflecting on your comment earlier about the chicken and the egg, and whether we know if an athlete was born with a certain characteristic to handle higher cognitive load at the same time that they can push themselves really high in their given sport, or whether they trained to be able to handle that load. And my instinct is that I trained myself to handle it. I don't think I was born with it, but I look at someone like Lachlan or Lael Wilcox, and I think those people were probably born with whatever that is. And there's a guy out of California who does a podcast that's called, it's about being driven. His whole concept is about I am driven or being driven. I can't remember his name at the moment. I'll put it in the show notes for people who are interested, or you can just go make the Googles. But he talks about how there are definite testable connections or metrics that we can find in people that will give them that phenotype that he has termed driven, or I don't know if it's his term or other researchers. But there's definitely things you can point at to say, yeah, this is that type of person who's got that mentality and that fixation, and you can see it in their DNA actually. For whatever that's worth. Yeah. I don't know if it's something, if that resonates with what your research talks about or what, but anyway.
Well, I think we're all, for whatever reason, I think it's often a lot easier for people to wrap their head around the notion of an athlete being gifted for some physical capacity, right? Like, yeah. That dude's VO2 max is off the charts. Okay, we can somehow wow, he was lucky in the parent lottery, right?
Yeah.
And yet the brain is just an organ, and it's no different than in an abstract than the heart, right? The mind is analogous to circulation. The heart beats, there's circulation. The brain works, there's the mind. And of course, some people are gifted in certain ways when it comes to the functions of that mind organ. And I think when those stars align with physical things, that's when really interesting things happen athletically.
Yep. Yeah, very well said. I think
we see it in the ball sports, right? Think about the ball sports. We can see it there, like that person operates at a different wavelength than other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right.
But it's true in our sports.
It's not strength that hits home runs, right? I mean, it's not a strong bicep or a strong shoulder. Yeah, it's correct. Yeah, it's reaction time
and a lot of work.
A lot of work.
And then a lot of work in those things. Right. And it's the same in cycling and running and triathlons and all the rest of it.
I like what you said, Colby, about the trance-like power of cycling, or like a pursuit or an optimization of anything. I think that does well to describe this like automatic nature that's kind of at the core of like any training we're trying to do, whether it's physical training, mental training, technical training. Like, we're trying to build a process and a capacity to where we increase our chance to like enter that trance-like state, that flow state, and then it happens automatically. But my kind of like bring it all together, like key takeaway is like, just like our physical training, the mental side of it, like going back to where we started from the neck up, some of it happens accidentally, and like some of us are more genetically gifted or predisposed to like accessing success or having a chance there. But no matter where we are in that gene spectrum or natural abilities spectrum, we can all improve and make ourselves better with deliberate, intentional, focused work, whether it is that more like holistic, encompassing, like I'm a psychologist aspect of coaching, like you described, Colby, and is also a little more what I do, or if it also is this specific brain training, harnessing that neuroplasticity that Scott talked about. Not non-accidental improvements. These are sought after and went after.
Yeah. Intentional cultivation of the ability to focus and find flow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good way to put it.
Exactly. Well said, Brent.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming on today. Maybe you can take a moment to tell everyone where they can find more out about your programs and the products that you offer.
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Brent?
Oh yeah, I'm easy. I'm just I'm Brent Bookwalter at everywhere. BrentBookwalter.com or Instagram or LinkedIn or Twitter or Gmail. And you can find out all about me there. And then Scott can tell you about my my collaboration and interaction and involvement with cerebral performance in his space and his business there.
Yeah, so I started when I left the university. I started a business called Cerebral Performance, and I work with a small number of athletes one-on-one in the endurance sports. It's the focused. And then Brent and I have been developing some group-based programs as well. And people can go to cerebralperformance.com to learn more about all of that. I try to put some science up there as best I can keep that updated. It does kind of go in fits and surges. But if people have questions, they're also welcome to just email me at scott@cerebralperformance.com. And there's an Instagram account and a LinkedIn for that too. So Colby, thank you so much for having us. It'd be great to grab a coffee with you sometime when I come down to Boulder. I'm up in Fort Collins.
You're in Fort Collins, you're close. Yeah, that'd be great. My fit studio is right above a coffee shop, so that's very convenient.
That is convenient.
We'll get an espresso.
All right.
That'd be great. That'd be great. And tell people, do people work with you first to get access to your app? Is that how that works normally, or can they go in the app store and is it forward facing or?
Yeah. So right now I'm using, I found a third-party software that allowed me the freedom and flexibility to do the things I want to do. And so that's commercially available, but the programs that I build out and stuff would be through working with me.
Got it. Okay. Cool. So go email Scott and find out more. Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah. Thanks, Colby.
Thank you, guys.
Great. Good to talk to you both. Yeah. I'll have to make it out to Colorado to see you in the flesh in person.
That would be nice.
That'd be great. Yeah.
All right.
Sure, and let me know if you guys are out here. All right.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Attention, well dippers. Did you know that I offer a unique service at my studio in Boulder, Colorado? An integrative fitting is the culmination of my experience and understanding that helps an athlete have a deeper insight into their relationship to cycling and movement. This is understood in the context of how the dream, goal, or objective aligns the client's choices and habits. The psyche, the environment, and drive will all influence the current expression of athletic ability. As we understand these factors, we can shape and direct athletic potential. What this means in a practical sense is that we spend about 6 hours working together, including a short or outdoor ride. I will film you on and off the bike, and we will discuss an extensive intake questionnaire. You will leave the fitting with a unique perspective on your function and with actionable pathways to improve your performance. This service was created specifically to help cyclists who have been through various fitting sessions and have had unsuccessful or unsatisfactory results. We dig deeper to find more meaningful outcomes. If you are interested in knowing more about an integrative fitting, please visit my website, colbypierce.com, where you can book an appointment. Epilogue. I want to share a few brief thoughts about the inception of Cycling in Alignment. The purpose of this podcast is for me to get 3.5 decades of hard-fought lessons out of my skull. Some of them through my own research and reading. Some of them I've been taught through mentors and colleagues other riders, other racers. A lot of it, a massive amount of it, was simply trial and error through my own stubborn methods. And that has amassed a certain amount of experience and knowledge, understanding. And while I think I'm reasonably smart and I know quite a bit of stuff, I want to make it clear that the opinions that I share on this podcast are belief systems built on what I've experienced to this point. And that some of those opinions are pretty strong, but they are also loosely held. That is to say that if I learn more about a topic and have a greater level of clarity or understanding, then my old belief systems will be abandoned and I will now operate under that newfound knowledge. So I'm not here to tell people all the things that I know. I'm here to explain what I've learned to this point. And there's a big difference. Also, that is the intent when I discuss things on the pod with guests, is to learn from them and have a discourse. Because if we can't have a discourse as adults, then we've lost one of the basic tenets of modern society. Even if we disagree, we ought to be able to, in most cases, shake hands and walk away. Because after all, this is sport we're talking about, and while sport is training for life, it's nothing to get too upset over. The purpose of the podcast is to help me help other people, and specifically to help them actualize their highest potential by illuminating a path that enables alignment with their truth, their intent, and their coherence. That's really the end goal. So I'm grateful for your listening. My intent is also not, to be clear, to gain an audience or become popular or gain social status in any way. I don't care about that stuff. That said, if you feel an episode that you have heard will help someone you know, please share it with them. That helps us reach the end goal, which is to help more people. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful for your time and attention. Blessings.